we should follow up on this. Matt joined us in some rather unique attire last week. In case he was going to get style tips from Chime Moneki, and we put that clip out there into the Twitter world. And I was a bit surprised by the response we got.
Yeah, man, it was. I told you it was fresh. I told you it was.
I just want to be clear. He had a tie tied around his head.
And that's next thing you know, Matt George is gonna have the paper towel wrapped around his head too. That's how we do it.
Chime Moneki said he's going to have to take style tips from Matt George. That's where we are right now.
It's a good thing nobody lies on social media and everybody's straightforward and truthful. Because I take that for every bit of what it's worth.
As straight and truthful as Doug Gottlieb.
Ooh, well. Yikes.
What do you? I like. Do you think Chime is going to make the roster?
Yes, I do.
I don't want to take this happy moment and ruin it, but like, there's going to be some tough calls, towards the end of training camp. These are guys that we like, all of these guys, but there are probably some guys that they're just not going to make it.
Yeah, from what I understand from conversations that I've had, and we've seen pictures of, like, Chima's been there working out. We've seen Davion, which is nothing new. Davion basically lives in the gym. You've seen Kayvon. He's been out working. De'Aaron's been in there as well. Like, there's a lot of guys out there that are working. And from conversations that I've had, I've been told that everybody's been really impressed with Chima to this point, like really happy with how he's been playing. Now, of course, training camp is a different beast when that comes. But I think Chima absolutely does have a really good chance to make the roster. I've also been told that Matthew Dellavedova hasn't looked as good as maybe they were hoping. But that could just be him working off the rust here early in summer. Again, these are all pre training camp things, and Dellavedova's trying to get himself back into like that NBA style. So that'd be something to pay attention to. Even though I mean, even before hearing that information, though, I thought that was going to be Quinn Cook's spot. If they do bring a third point guard in, I think it's Quinn Cook's spot to lose at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Delly, he's got an uphill battle. You know what I mean? He's been out of the game, 2 years, 3 years? Out of the NBA.
Might have an over the hill battle.
Right. I mean, I know, and I'm not even a professional athlete. Like, it's at some point, it's like, it's just, I can't get up and down the court the way I used to. I'm trying, I'm working on it, but it's not the same way. So I don't have any issue with Delly. If he was able to put it together to be on the team, cool, but it just seems like a tough spot for him.
I see some people in the chatty house too asking about Okpala. I haven't heard much about Okpala to this point, to be honest with you. Although from what I understand, at least what I've been told, if there was one that was a little more of like a developmental project than the other, Okpala was more of a developmental project than Moneki, from as far as I understand. But I'm not saying one is leagues ahead or behind of the other. Both are going to be fighting to really develop into hopefully NBA rotational players. But as far as right now, if one were more likely over the other, as far as I understand, Moneki is more likely than Okpala, but that could change in an instant.
But that kind of feels like the case, though. Like you referenced it with Delly and Quinn Cook. Like it felt like when they started bringing a handful of more guys in, it became like, okay, there's like legitimate. We talk about roster battles, like there's legit. I would say we talk about position battles. There's legit roster battles here, as to where some of these guys just aren't going to make the cut. And I think when Quinn Cook came in, Matthew Dellavedova, these different guys in, it's like, okay, now you start cutting this roster down a little bit. One of those guys will make it, and we thought the same thing with. I think when Kent Bazemore came in, it's probably like, okay, Okpala or Chime Moneki. Like, you're not going to have all of these guys back. Like that's what we were talking about a minute ago. Some of these guys we've spent time talking about, they're just not going to make the roster.
I do know that Mike Brown, I mean, he's a fan of both Moneki and Okpala from the time with the Nigerian team, but I think I remember reading, and I have to look it back up, but when the Kings initially signed Okpala or brought him in, I tracked down Brown saying something about he thinks he could be develop into like a defensive player of the year type candidate. So I know there's a love for KZ's ability on the defensive end of the floor, which may be how he works his way in. If he just comes into training camp and puts his head down and shows that he can be at times like, hey, we need to put you in at the end of second quarter here, one final possession to guard this guy and get a stop. Like maybe that's a role that he can carve out for himself and then develop the offensive game alongside it. But I don't know, like it's just one of many storylines in training camp that I'm very eager to pay attention to.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how that plays out, because that's going to be a test for my theory that you can find. People are always stressed out about, getting a three, getting a small forward, all this other stuff. And I just feel like you can find these type of guys all over the place. Akpala being that type of guy. Like you can find him, you know what I mean? And find a guy that's 6'6", 6'7", that can just be a defensive guy on the wing, because that's what you're looking for. Obviously, you're hoping for a 3-and-D type guy, but now those guys are a little harder to find. But if you need somebody to spell your starting small forward and give solid minutes and work hard, I feel like you can find those guys rather easily. But we'll see. I mean, these are the type of guys I'm talking about, and we'll see if they're able to stick in the league or not.
One of the questions that I've been thinking about, and I'll throw it out to you guys too, is looking at all the players who are returning this season, who are part of the roster by the end of last season. Are any of them at risk of not making it? Like, and I think about the very end of the roster. I think about guys like Alex Len, about maybe, I don't know if it's fair to say Chimezie Metu's towards the end, but Chimezie Metu. And I don't know if any of those guys are at risk of losing their spot unless they just show up and are completely out of shape, which is not going to happen because both of them are playing in FIBA as far as I understand. So I don't think, like, it's where you have to think about how many spots are available too. Like, even if the Kings do have a lot of new names and new faces and are trying to be a new team, there are a lot of returners from last season that are, I think, set or almost guaranteed to make the roster.
Yeah, Chimezie's an interesting one to discuss. I think Alex Len is too, though. I think there's probably a place for Alex Len. I've always been I'll keep the same energy. I'd really like to see Keita be on the main roster.
Yeah.
Kenny's always, we're at the point in the offseason we're repeating stuff. Like, I understand that, but Kenny makes the point of Keita, get the work in Stockton, because that's what you need most is the work. Get the work up here, but be here. Like be here, be on the roster. I'd like to see him get that Alex Len spot. It is a minimal spot, and I understand that. And I understand the argument for keeping Alex Len when you could do something else with Neemias Queta, but that's the one I find most interesting.
So you like the idea of converting his two-way into a full contract, getting Len's spot, and then maybe getting whoever between Meneke and Akpala who doesn't make it, giving them that two-way spot potentially. Like that's maybe an option.
Yeah, I just want to see. Neemias Queta. Like, if you have moments, and we know they'll be there for good or for bad, but sometimes more often for bad, that the game is a certain direction late. Let's rock with Neemias Queta, or we need a bigger body, we need some energy, we need something. You kind of know what Alex Len is. You know what he can do, and if Mike Brown needs that, cool, run with it. I want to see Neemias Queta though.
This sounds weird too, and I'm almost excited about the lack of projects. And what I mean by that is like Meneke, Akpala, Keita, Keon Ellis, like these guys are developmental projects for the team that they believe could have a possibility of being something in the future. But those guys aren't taking spots 14, 13, and 12. Like it's going to be 14 and 15 or 15 and two-way spots. Like that to me is exciting versus years past, because 1 through 5 is pretty much set, I think. Definitely 1 through 7, I think, is definitely set. And then 8 and 9 are guys that are going to be playing consistently. Those 2 spots are up to grabs. Even 10 could make a case for it. And then 11 and 12 are also guys that are like, okay, we're ready to go when you need us, and we can come in and keep the ball rolling too. Like, the depth is something that's really exciting about this team this year. And I know I've said that in years past and been proved absolutely a fool. So we'll have to wait and see when they actually start playing games. But the fact that there's not 2 second-round picks that are not two-way contracts but are holding spots 14 and 15, that's exciting to me.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. That's a good question, though, about who's on the roster that might be in danger of not making it. And we talk about Freeport. I like Freeport. But he's got to show something in this training camp. He's got to show something in this preseason. And he's got to show that he's worked on his game, and he's added different dimensions to his game, and he understands the game on a different level. And maybe with Mike Brown, there's somebody that he's familiar with, there's a level of comfort there that he's able to do things that we didn't see him do much last year. But that's one guy that I'm looking at. I'll be honest with you. I may be biased. I'm rooting for him because I like him. You know, I want it to happen. But if I'm being transparent, I mean, I think he's one of the guys you got to look at and see if, man, can we use that roster spot? Because now you've got Keegan Murray there, and I think Trey Lyles is better than Chimezie Metu right now for what they're trying to do. So he's going to have to step his game up in training camp.
I think floor spacing is a massive thing for him shooting. And he's a 30% 3-point shooter for his career, shot 30% from 3-point range last season. The question is though, like, what if you could pencil in a 3-point percentage? Like, you could say this is the percentage that he is going to have this season. Like, what is the lowest you could pencil in to say, yeah, he absolutely gets a roster spot? Is it like 34, 35%? Yeah.
I'd say my first thought was 35.
Yeah.
My first thought.
That's what I was thinking too. Because I think if Metu could develop more consistent of a 3-point shot, because he hits them every once in a while, but also missed a fair few. And I like the volume at which he was taking them, because a lot of them he was shooting good shots.
That's what I was about to ask you. Does he need to cut back on the number of shots that he takes from back there?
Yes.
Yes, but also I thought a lot of the shots that he got were in rhythm. I think a lot of the shots that he got were going to be shots that he's going to get, and a lot of players are going to get just for the amount of attention that Sabonis and Fox are going to draw. So corner threes, if Chimezie can make that a specialty of his, like that's valuable for Sacramento.
Yeah, if they fall, like,
yeah,
I don't know if he's the caliber. You framed it perfectly, Matt. If he can make that, if that becomes a weapon, if that becomes something that the Kings can utilize, man, absolutely. I just think there were times we'd come in, it's like, yo, I know you do the same thing on Locked On. Like, I'm sorry, Freeport was 1 of 8 from 3. Green light to shoot 8 3-pointers. I don't care what kind of rhythm he was in. Pass the ball, Chimezie.
That was a consistent issue throughout this roster, though. Like, there were a lot of guys that would just chuck up threes. Like when Justin Holiday came to town, he did it. Dante DiVincenzo, to some extent, he did it. We all know Buddy Hield did it while he was here, and he was straight enabled to by Luke Walton before Luke was dismissed. Like, I think that was more of a roster-wide like enablement problem than it was. And
it was an organizational issue.
Chimezie's at the end of the season go, well, hell, everybody's doing it. I'm gonna do it too. I'm gonna get my numbers up to 32%. Nope.
Yeah, that's one, and I like what you talked about as well, Damian, with Alex Lynn, because I don't know if they were able to keep some of those guys at the 3 and the 4 spot. Do you think that's enough to kind of put to rest the concern of not having enough wing defenders? If they were able to keep some of those guys, the Bazemores, the Okpalas, is that enough for you, Matt?
I don't know. The way I would answer it is this: like, I think Kent Bazemore is number 10 right now, and I mean he's number 10 because if it's a depth chart and I'm looking at my backup 3 behind Harrison Barnes, it's at this point Kent Bazemore. But I also don't think the Kings are running a 10-man rotation. Like, I think it's some combination of, I mean, it's going to be Fox, Herter / Monk, and whatever doesn't start will be 6th or 7th man off the bench. It's Barnes, it's hopefully Keegan Murray or Trey Lyles. So again, whoever doesn't play will come off the bench, and it's Domantas Sabonis. Then you add Davion Mitchell and you add Rashawn Holmes to that. There's your 9. Like, those 9 are set. I don't know how anybody creeps into those 9. 10, I think, is Kent Bazemore at this point, and maybe that's a spot that is up for grabs for a Chimezie Metu. It's up for grabs for a and maybe Trey Lyles is not that good, and maybe he gets that spot taken from him, although I think Trey Lyles is going to be a consistent part of the rotation nightly. Maybe that's a spot that KZ Okpala or Chima Maneke can get into. I think Keon Ellis should also look at this opportunity and go, this team needs someone like me. If I could consistently become an NBA scoring threat defensively, the Kings are in need of Keon Ellis. That's why I think he and his agent decided to sign with the Kings after the draft, because he knows I got opportunity here. So I don't think it's fair to say a two-way player is by the end of the season in his first rookie season going to be in a part of the rotation, but I don't think it's out of left field for Keon Ellis to become the next Damian Jones or the next Chimezie Metu and work his way to a full-time spot, to where now maybe next offseason, next training camp, we're like, okay, maybe Keon Ellis can be that wing depth that Sacramento always needs.
Right.
Yeah, he'll be a guy. I'll be anxious to watch him in Stockton and watch how his development goes. And I think you're right about Kent Bazemore, though, because Kevin Huerter, I think, is going to. You talk about the depth charts. Kevin Huerter, whether he's the starting 2 or not, he's probably the backup 3. Yeah. And then there's Kent Bazemore after that. Yeah. And then you're kind of juggling things around and kind of figuring out. Hopefully, my biggest hope, and I know we've echoed this, no going into game 1. Yes. Have a training camp and a preseason good enough to where you just said pretty definitively, I feel like this 9 is impenetrable. Mm-hmm. I absolutely need Mike Brown to believe that too when the season starts. Like, y'all over here at 11 and 12 and 13, y'all got work to do. We've got work. This is my rotation. This is how I see this. And I just 5th game of the season here with the 4th starting lineup. Like, oh man, nah, let's not do that.
No, absolutely not. I agree with that completely too. And I will say this, like, I'm very interested to see also what Keegan Murray looks like at the 3, because I think he's going to get opportunity at that spot, depending upon what the Kings try to do with Trey Lyles and where he fits into things too. Because we know Harrison can move down to the 4 if he needs to. I don't think Keegan is a 3, but I want to see what it looks like. And defensively, if he's getting torched, then we know. I'm not worried about offense. Defense is what I'm worried about, and that's what Mike Brown's focus is. So we'll know pretty quickly if Keegan can play the 3 defensively or not in Mike Brown's